Hi, class. I wanted to take a few minutes. This is your instructor, Jack Downs. I wanted to take a few minutes and talk to you about some of the proofing and editing features that are embedded within Microsoft's Word programs. Whether it's 2003, 2007, 2010, all of them have some pretty powerful proofing and review features embedded in the software itself. So I want to talk to you about that. And I've created this dummy document, and I do mean dummy. It is littered with misspellings and probably some grammatical errors, and I wanted to use it as the basis for talking about some of the ways you can review your writing after you have completed it. And so before I go through how to do review, which kind of starts up with this review button here, I wanted to take you and show you how to. A lot of people think, well, if you're familiar with the review that it does, that MS Word does, a lot of people assume that it's sort of a given. You know, it does what it does. It's a big black box, and you kind of have to live with what its capabilities are and are not. And I wanted to take you kind of behind the wizard's curtain and show you where the rules are contained that MS Word applies when it looks at your document and then cites what it deems to be violations of those rules. So if you go up here to File, click on File, and go down to Options. And now, by the way, this is MS Word 2010, I think. So sometimes the menu, it changes the various ways you have to get to these features. But somewhere in your menu chain, you'll have a choice called Options. If you click on it, it takes you to a box that looks like this. And we're only concerned today with proofing. So we'll take a look at this proofing. So we click on that, and it takes you to a screen that looks like this. The first thing I wanted to show you is a little feature called Readability Statistics. Most people are not aware of it or how it works or what its particular uses might be. So, and it comes from the factory turned off, which is why a lot of people probably don't know it's there. So we're going to click on Readability Statistics here. We'll get back to that in a minute. Just make sure it's on your computer. Everything I'm showing you today, by the way, that you may change on your computer, just be aware that those changes are resident to whatever computer you make the changes on. They don't travel with your document. So if you have a home computer and a work computer and you do work on both, if you like some of the things I show you today and decide to make some changes, you'll have to make the changes on both computers in order for them to be resident on both computers. We're going to change from grammar only to grammar and style. Settings. It brings up a screen that looks like this. People often ask, we have discussed this week the comma required before the last list item. You can have MS Word check to make sure that you do that. That's what this first thing refers to, is do I put a comma in before the and? I would suggest that you mark it as always if it's not currently marked that way. Punctuation required with quotes refers to commas and periods. They should always be, at least in North America, inside the quote. Commas and periods to end a sentence should always be inside a closing quote. Question marks have a different rule, and we won't get into that right now, but they are not included in, they won't be affected by this rule. Spaces required between sentences. I frankly, I've played around with this a few times. My short answer, and I can go into more detail if you'd like offline, I would leave it alone. I mean, you should have at least a space between the end of your sentence and the beginning of the next one. In some forms of writing, there two spaces are considered to be appropriate protocol, but you can drive yourself crazy being dinged for not having the right number of spaces, and so I just leave it alone. The rest of this stuff is just things that MS Word will check on its own. Should a particular word be capitalized or not? I usually leave that on. Fragments and run-on sentences, it'll check for those. Negation, I leave it alone, but you can check it if you like. And I won't go through all of these. If your particular form of writing, if you do, for example, heavy legal writing or proposal writing, writing with legal liability, contractions are usually frowned on. And so you may want to leave this on. Since I generally use a lot of contractions in my writing. I don't want to be dinged. Contraction is simply when I take something like will not and make it won't, as sort of a more personable, familiar way to talk. So you may want to leave that alone. Passive sentences, I would keep it clicked on, otherwise it won't prompt you if it sees one. And you probably want to use as few passive sentence construction as you can. I won't go into the rest of these, and we'll select OK. But that's where those rules are contained. Was there anything else I wanted to show you over there? I don't think so. But let's go then to the document itself. I'm going to select OK. I've made whatever changes I want to make. In order for me to start a spelling and grammar review of a document, I can click anywhere in the document. I usually click in the very beginning, and then click Review. I want to what am I doing? Oh, I'm sorry, Spelling and Grammar Review. And as soon as I click this, it'll start its process of telling me what it thinks is a violation. Now here, this is kind of interesting. It jumped right past the word activity, even though it's underlined it with a blue squiggly line. If I click on to see why it's done that, if I right-click, it'll say, I think there should be a comma after the word activity, and it's correct in this case because and I must have that turned off in my controls because this is an introductory clause and it should have a comma. Here it's saying, I guess, let's continue with the spelling and grammar review. Here it's saying he doesn't recognize the word rules. So I've misspelled the word rules. I really should be. And it doesn't recognize the one I wanted. So I'm going to say, gee, you know, I think this probably should have been R-U-L-E-S rules. So I want to make that change. And it says, fine, resume. And it says, then I have the next sentence here I have is, I've got a sentence called, this just says simply the building blocks. And it's saying, well, that's a fragment, a sentence fragment, which is true. It does not have a noun and a verb, so it's not a complete sentence. I've used it as a literary device to kind of provide an additional underscoring of the point I was making in the first sentence, which is, oh, and here's another thing it missed. But I'm making a point about basic rules of spelling and grammar, which are the building blocks. So I think sentence fragments are fine as long as you intend to use them. And so I'm going to let that slide. Now here, it did not ding me for the word some because some is actually a word, even though in this case, it's the wrong word. This should be S-O-M-E. Let me continue with spelling and grammar review. Here, the building blocks. And I'm going to say, ignore that because I intend that. I like that. And we come down here and it's saying, this is one step to take along. It's saying, did you mean to hyphenate one step? Well, in this case, I don't. This should not be hyphenated, in my opinion. This is one step to take along with reading. So I'm going to say, ignore that as well. Don't make that change. And here, it's one step. It's saying there should be a comma after paragraphs, checking length of your, oh, and see here, by the way, it did not ding me for your, Y-O-R-E, because it's actually a word, even though it's the wrong word. The point I'm making with these purposeful mistakes is to point out the spelling and grammar review will not fix everything. So it is an adjunct, if you will, to the work you do reading your own document, as well as applying the spelling and grammar review, which can also be extremely helpful. So continuing right along then, does paragraphs require a comma after? Oops, it skipped that one. You can be helped a lot with this tool. It's saying here you used passive voice. It generally will not offer me an alternative to passive voice. It'll just say, you know, the reason we don't like it is it's sort of not as lively, it's not as active as active voice, obviously. And how would I phrase this in an active voice manner? I would say something like, this tool can help you a lot. Active voice always has fewer words than passive voice, so for no other reason, that's something that you probably want to consider doing as well. Now, I'm going to ignore it to kind of move along, and again, it's dinging me for you. It's saying, did you mean we here? We rather than a word for sheep, and what I really meant was you. Also want to be sure. Resume. You is. Oh, when you're preparing your, it's saying, did you mean you is here? And of course I didn't. What I really meant was your in this shape, and it missed the other your, which should have been a contraction for you are when you are preparing your final document. And that should take me, whoops, still doesn't like this. I'm still going to ignore it. Oh, and here again it's saying checking lengths of your paragraphs and reading a piece aloud. Oh, look at this. This should be allowed, A-L-L, whoops, A-L-O-U-D. Checking lengths of your paragraphs. There should be a comma here, of course, and reviewing your verb choices. So, okay, we're ignoring one step. And we covered the passive voice. And when I complete my spelling and grammar review, this box now pops up. The reason you probably have not seen it before, even if you're familiar with spelling and grammar review, is because it doesn't show up unless you click on that little box for readability statistics. And the only statistics I'm really interested in are these last three numbers here, the readability ones. And what it's saying is, in my document, 14% of my total verbs are passive verbs. You generally, in social writing, science is a different thing, but in social writing, you generally want to push for about maybe 3 to 8% total passive verbs. And if you have zero, that's even better. But you don't want to have a lot of passive verbs. 14% is a little bit on the high side of what you'd like to see there. The flesh reading ease number is, if you can imagine, on a scale of 100 to 0, 100 is very, very simplistic writing. It's a score of 100 would be green eggs and ham. That Sam I am, that Sam I am. I do not like that Sam I am. Do you like green eggs and ham? So they're all one-syllable words, very simple sentences, very short paragraphs. They're written for, first graders, kindergartners, second graders, and so you would expect to see that. And that's not the kind of book you necessarily, as an adult, want to take to the beach. So you're not looking for it doesn't mean that a higher score is necessarily better. It just means that the reading, or the writing rather, is geared toward somebody of a very low reading ability. And the flip side of that, the Flesch Kincaid grade level, is exactly what it says. It's saying somebody, the document you just read by me, somebody in the 7th grade, 2/10 of the way through the 7th grade, would have an easy time reading my document based on the length of the words, the length of the sentences, and the length of the paragraphs. It doesn't make there's nothing about the grade has anything to do with the quality of the words. It's not saying happy is a better word than glad, for example. It's just saying, based on very simple statistics, it makes the reading something that a 7th grader, 2/10 of the way through the 7th grade, would have an easy time with. And I think the value of this, if there's any, that you'll find is when you do your draft writing and you do your first run through of your spelling and grammar review, you may find that these numbers are higher or more challenging than you like. They may be up in the 13th grade, for example, which is a freshman in college, 14th grade. That's not a big deal, but I think you'll find as you revise your work that your numbers tend to come down. And so, and that's because as you revise your work and make it more reader-centered, you're writing in a way that is easier for the reader to digest, and the words tend to become shorter, fewer syllables in the words that you tend to use, and shorter sentences, for example, maybe crisper paragraphs. You'll notice, for example, in a lot of the comments I give to you, I suggest you strike things. And what I'm acknowledging or trying to point out is that, the biggest favor you can do the reader, as sort of an acknowledgement of the value of their time, is to say things in a space that doesn't require any more words than necessary to get your point across. If you're using excess words, it begins to sound condescending, and you never want to do that. So that's what the readability statistics are about. And I hope you found this screencast helpful. And I look forward to your suggestions about additional screencasts. And I hope you have a great week. Thank you.